There is an old story about a general who was so brilliant at winning battles that his commanders kept promoting him, right up until the moment they handed him a war. Because battles and wars are not the same thing. Winning battles feels like winning. The numbers look extraordinary, the enemy retreats, the press releases write themselves. And then, usually around the third or fourth campaign, someone notices that all those individual victories have somehow produced a strategic position that is very, very difficult to hold. I mention this not because I have strong feelings about military history, but because it describes almost exactly what happened in American politics on the night of May 20th, 2026. And the people celebrating right now are going to find the next 6 months genuinely clarifying. So here is what did happen, because it is worth stating clearly before we get to the part everyone is skipping past. Donald Trump endorsed candidates across 6 states: Kentucky, Georgia, Alabama, Idaho, Oregon, and Pennsylvania, and the vast majority of them won. The headline result was in Kentucky's 4th congressional district, where a 13-year incumbent named Thomas Massie, a man who had won his last several elections by margins of 30 points or more, lost by 10 points to a former Navy SEAL named Ed Galrine, a candidate with virtually no name recognition before Trump backed him. The race became the most expensive House primary in American history. Over $33 million spent in a single congressional district. Galrine, in his victory speech, thanked Trump before he thanked the voters of Kentucky, which is at least honest. And in Georgia, Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State, who in 2020 refused Trump's request to, and I am quoting directly here, find 11,780 votes, failed to make it past the first round of the Republican gubernatorial primary, finishing dead last with about 14% of the vote. So, 2 of Trump's most prominent Republican critics dealt with in a single evening. That is a real thing that happened, and it would be dishonest to wave it away. Now, the narrative that has immediately formed around all of this is that Trump has achieved something historically unprecedented, and there is some truth in that, though not quite as much as is being claimed. His endorsement record in 2026, running at essentially 100% across more than 100 primary races, according to Ballotpedia's trackers, does surpass his prior cycles. In 2018, Trump endorsed candidates won around 95% of their primaries. In 2022, out of office, the number was around 93%, climbing to 96% by the end of the cycle. So, the trajectory is real, the grip is tightening. But there are 2 things worth noting that the victory narrative is quietly omitting. 1, Trump has, as of this recording, already lost at least 1 endorsed race this cycle. His pick in the Iowa gubernatorial primary fell to a challenger named Zach Lawn. The narrative of a perfect record is technically already imperfect. And 2, Trump's team is very good at what political scientists politely call endorsement selection, which is to say, they tend to back candidates who are already likely to win, then claim the credit. When you look at genuinely contested races, where the endorsement actually moved the needle against a strong opponent, the picture is considerably more complicated. Massie, to his credit, had the good grace to point this out on his way out the door. "They couldn't buy my vote in 14 years, he said, so they bought this seat," which is a good line. It is also, functionally, a concession speech. It is worth spending a moment on why Thomas Massie was targeted specifically, because the framing you will find most places presents it as a simple loyalty test. Massie defied Trump, Trump punished him, case closed. That is a reasonable summary, and also an incomplete one. Massie's actual offenses against the White House were several. He voted against the Big Beautiful Bill, Trump's signature tax legislation, on the grounds that it added too much to the national deficit. He co-authored the Epstein Files Transparency Act alongside Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna, forcing the Justice Department to release documents that, as Massie later pointed out, contained the redacted names of at least 6 individuals whose inclusion in those files was, in his words, incriminating. He opposed American military involvement in the Iran conflict, and he was one of the very few Republicans willing to publicly question unconditional support for Israel's conduct in the region. Now, what is interesting about this list is that all of these positions, fiscal restraint, government transparency, skepticism of foreign entanglements, questioning foreign aid, were, not very long ago, considered core conservative principles. The kind of things that would have gotten a standing ovation at a Heritage Foundation dinner in 2010. What Massie's defeat demonstrates is not that those ideas have been repudiated. It is that, inside the 2026 Republican Party, being right on the merits is functionally irrelevant if you are not loyal first. Representative Randy Fine of Florida put it plainly on Truth Social the night of the result. This is Donald Trump's Republican Party. That is not analysis. It is a press release, but it is accurate. The Trump White House was, of course, asked about all of this. The results speak for themselves, came the response, and the president appreciates loyalty, which is the kind of answer that tells you everything about the dynamic and nothing about its consequences. And on CNN, and this is worth pausing on for a moment, senior political commentator Scott Jennings said, live on air, you don't tug on Superman's cape, you don't spit into the wind, and you don't mess with Trump in a Republican primary. He then compared the night directly to a referendum on whether Thomas Massie was on the team. Superman, on CNN, said without irony, that tells you something about where the conversation currently is. Here is the thing about Georgia, though. Because Georgia exists, and Georgia is a problem for the invincibility framing that everyone has settled on since Tuesday night. Trump endorsed Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones in the Republican gubernatorial primary. Jones got 38% of the vote. That sounds acceptable until you learn that a billionaire with no prior political career, a healthcare executive named Rick Jackson, who spent $83.5 million of his own money on the race, got 34%. Neither man crossed the 50% threshold required to avoid a runoff. So, Trump's endorsed candidate is heading into a June runoff against someone whose primary qualification is that he has access to essentially unlimited personal funds and zero obligation to anyone in the party establishment. That is not a triumph. That is a pending test. And Trump's team picked a fight with Jackson's money in a state that has a long and distinguished history of doing the exact opposite of what Donald Trump wants, and then handing him the invoice. In 2022, Trump backed David Perdue against incumbent Governor Brian Kemp. Kemp beat Perdue by 52 points. He backed Jody Hice against Raffensperger for Secretary of State in that same cycle. Raffensperger won by 18 points. Georgia is, in this sense, a recurring theme. It will be interesting to see whether the runoff changes the chapter or simply confirms it. And now we arrive at the part that the victory narrative is doing its level best to avoid, because here is what is also true, simultaneously, right now. Trump's approval rating, as of this recording, sits at approximately 34% in the Pew Research Center's most recent survey, the lowest of his second term. Aggregated polling averages from the New York Times, CNN, and Nate Silver's tracker place him in the mid to high 30s nationally. His disapproval is approaching 60%. His approval rating on the economy, the issue voters have consistently ranked as their top concern in every poll this year, is 37%. On inflation specifically, it is 30%. His approval among independent voters, the voters who do not participate in Republican primaries and therefore were entirely absent from Tuesday's results, sits below 34% according to the most recent tracking data. Now, here is why that matters structurally. Every president whose party has lost more than 20 House seats at midterms had independent approval below 40% heading into November. That is not a theory. That is the historical pattern across every cycle tracked. Trump is currently sitting well below that threshold. Democrats flipped 41 House seats in 2018, the last time Trump entered midterms with numbers in this range. Republicans hold a narrow majority in the House right now. They need to lose just 3 seats for Democrats to take control. 3, and the candidates Trump has successfully installed through Republican primaries are, almost by definition, selected for their loyalty to Trump, not for their appeal to the median voter in a competitive suburban district who is primarily worried about grocery prices and whether their son is going to get drafted into a war in the Middle East. That tension does not resolve itself because CNN quoted a Jim Croce song. So, what is the honest read on this? And I will say clearly as I record this that it involves genuine uncertainty, because elections are not polls and May is not November, and there are variables that no model has priced in. But here is what we can say. Trump has demonstrated again and definitively that he controls the Republican primary electorate. The debate inside the party is over. No Republican politician who watched what happened to Thomas Massie is under any illusions about what the cost of dissent looks like. In that narrow sense, the Superman comparison is not wrong. Within Republican primaries, among Republican primary voters, he is close to undefeatable right now. But Massie, on his way out the door, said something that was largely buried under the celebrations. He said Trump had alienated the fiscal hawks by abandoning spending restraint, alienated the people who don't want to fight another war in the Middle East, and alienated voters who expected MAGA to mean something other than loyalty tests. He was making an argument for his own relevance. He may also have been describing, fairly accurately, the coalition that decides general elections. Donald Trump has, over the course of this primary season, succeeded in building the most loyal, ideologically coherent, personally devoted political party apparatus that modern American politics has produced in living memory. Every candidate who might have offered an independent voice has been removed, retired, or scared into silence. The party is unified, the message is clear, the apparatus is his. In November, that unified party will face an electorate that is not a Republican primary, which should make for a genuinely interesting autumn. I am Marcus Fenn. This is Borderlines, analysis from the edge. If this kind of analysis is worth having, subscribe now and be here from the beginning. The most consequential part of this story has not happened yet.